Okay, this is your second meeting. Okay.
Yes.
But she was a total pro. It was really nice to have her join last week. So it was going to be good.
Do you think we're
Ray.
Hi, May.
okay? There's Ray. Okay. Robert.
Looks like we're missing Aiden and Zechariah. Oh, and Dan. Let's see.
1, 2.
Maybe I'll just text them while we're waiting.
Planning Commission members? Hayward.
I'm texting the other two just to see. Let's see.
All right, thank you. All council members are here.
Down and get set up for having the 7 o'clock meeting. We're going to end this at 6:45. So I don't know how this is going to go. If we'll call on people, usually on something like this we would go kind of down the line because everybody wants to contribute. So I might just
go live. So I'll start the webinar.
Recording in progress.
Thank you. All right. All right, one moment, please.
Good evening. Due to COVID-19, this meeting will be conducted as a Zoom webinar pursuant to the provisions of the Governor's Executive Order N-2920, which suspends certain requirements of the Brown Act. This meeting is being webcast on Comcast TV Channel 15 and live streamed on the city's YouTube channel at https:// www.youtube.com/user/City of Hayward, and on the city website at https://hayward.legistar.com/calendar.aspx. The mayor will call upon members of the city council, city staff, and other speakers by name and ask that they state their names before giving comments or remarks. Individuals participating via Zoom with their cameras enabled are reminded that their activities are visible to viewers. City council members and members of the public participating by Zoom wishing to speak should use the raise hand feature, and the mayor will call upon them at the appropriate time. Members participating via teleconference wishing to speak should dial *9, and they will be called upon by the last 4 digits of their phone number. It is requested that public speakers state their names and organizations, but providing such information is voluntary. Written public comments received by email at list-mayor-council@hayward-ca.gov, city clerk@hayward-ca.gov, or via e-comment by 3 p.m. will be distributed to the city council and staff, published on the city's meeting and agenda center under documents received after published agenda, and entered into the record. Documents received after 3 p.m. through the adjournment of the meeting will be included as part of the meeting record and published the following day. A roll call vote will be taken for all action items. In order to get the full Zoom experience, please make sure your application is up to date. Public members wishing to speak with the City Council can send an email to list-mayor-council@hayward-ca.gov or cityclerk@hayward-ca.gov.
So I want to welcome everyone to this special joint work session of the City Council and the Hayward Planning Commission. And so welcome to all of you planning commissioners to our meeting. And as I said, we're going to call this meeting to order, and we're going to be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Council Member Zermano. And can you see the flag in back? Yes, you can. Oh, he's got one. All right. Go ahead. You're muted, Francisco. Can't lead us in the pledge if you're muted.
Oh, yeah, got it. Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So, Madam City Clerk, will you call the roll? Are you going to do both the Planning Commission and the Council?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Okay,
I'd be happy to do that. Good evening. And I'll go ahead and start with the City Council. Councilmember Andrews.
Present.
Councilmember Lamnan.
Present.
Councilmember Marquez.
Present.
Councilmember Salinas.
Present.
Councilmember Wahab.
Here.
Councilmember Zermano.
Here.
Mayor Halliday.
Here.
Now I'll move to the Planning Commission. Welcome, Planning Commission. Commissioner Ali Sullivan. I believe he's not joining us yet. Commissioner Bonilla.
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldstein.
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Lowe.
Here.
Commissioner Okenda.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Stevens.
Here.
Chair Roche.
Here.
Thank you. All members present. And for the Planning Commission, we have one person absent at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, so we will now go ahead and we've come to public comments. This is the opportunity for anyone attending from the public to comment on any items that are not on our agenda this evening. Our agenda this evening actually consists of one item, which is a work session, joint work session of these two bodies on the housing element of on the update of the housing element of the city's general plan. So I'm going to open public comments. I see we have a few attendees, but I do not see any hands raised. And you're not aware of anyone, Madam City Clerk, who wants to make a comment?
No, Madam Mayor, I'm not aware of anyone. If you like, we could have the information on this screen, the call-in information, or I mean, it's just one item, but it's up to you.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and put it on, just to make sure people know they have they can, whatever way they may be attending.
Definitely. All right, thank you so much. So community members wishing to join the meeting via Zoom can follow the information that I have on the screen at the moment. And there's the meeting ID passcode. So individuals using Zoom can join the meeting, and they can click the raise hand feature or icon to request to speak. Those joining via telephone can press *9. And I will unmute microphones when the mayor calls on individuals wishing to speak. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing at the moment. And I still don't see anyone wishing to speak.
We just got one. And so we will call on Lacey Amadei.
Perfect.
Hello, good evening, Council and Planning Commission. This is Lacey Amadei with the Hayward Collective. I have a brief comment, and that's just to say that we at the Collective look forward to working with you all on updating the housing element. We really appreciate the openness of staff to communicate with us about the housing element plans, especially to Leah Schmidt for letting us know about her dedication to community involvement and community outreach, especially involving those that don't typically participate in the process. And we just want to, emphasize, as I'm sure you all hear tonight, that, due to new state law and changes, housing elements now need to affirmatively further fair housing, which means that we do not only need to have elements of equity and affordable housing in our housing elements, but we actually need to put in place policies that's going to expand on that, whatever that may be, including reverse any patterns of residential segregation as to poverty or other protected classes. So we really look forward to you all on making our policies more bold, making them more robust, on increasing opportunities for affordable housing and for housing opportunity for those who are marginalized. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Those comments were actually on the agenda item, but I think, are we, Madam City Clerk, are we having, once we have the staff report, I think we will open it for other public comments, but
Correct.
But in any event, I think that was okay. Thank you for your comment. And with that, I'm going to close public comments right now, and we will go right into this work session. As I said, on the joint, it's the joint housing element work session. We'll be talking about the update to our the housing element of our general plan and residential objective standards project. And we're going to start, I believe, this off with our report, our Assistant City Manager and Development Services Director, Ms. Ott, is going to start us off here.
Great.
Right?
Yes, I am. Yep. And
Okay.
Acting Principal Planner Leah Schmidt will be sharing her screen. But while she does that, just thank you, Mayor and Council members.
Hay como enfrente como hay una bolsa, like una bolsa de plástica que debe primero.
I think, is that?
It was Lacey Amadei. I think Miriam.
Oh, Lacey. Yeah. If you could mute yourself.
Great. Well, good evening, Mayor, Council members, Chair, and Commissioners. I'm Jennifer Ott, Assistant City Manager, Development Services Director. Very excited to be here. This is my first opportunity having a joint work session with the Planning Commission and City Council. We're really excited. As you'll hear, we hope this is the beginning of many of them. This is a very big agenda tonight, and I'm really excited to talk about a number of different housing issues. The way we've structured it is actually to have kind of 3 presentations, short presentations by staff, and giving the council and the commission to have discussions on each of these items. There's a number of purposes for this. And one is to provide a very brief overview of state housing legislation. We did provide a very detailed analysis in your staff report. We could have a whole session just on this. So we wanted to give you kind of some of the themes from this, but not spend a lot of time on this. Also just wanted to really focus, one of the main purposes for having this was in, I believe June or July, the Planning Commission really wanted to have an opportunity to talk more closely with the council about some key policy issues. Obviously, they're the commission, the commission that's really implementing a lot of the council's housing and land use policies. And there's issues that have been coming up for them routinely on projects, and wanting an opportunity to share some of their thoughts and kind of own discussions about those issues. And those really focus around the affordable housing ordinance, which I know the council's also really wanted to delve into and talk about, as well as parking standards. So this is actually where the real kind of genesis of this meeting was, to pull us all together so that we could initiate some of those discussions. Because of that, we are going to touch on an overview of the affordable housing ordinance. You'll see that we do have that plan for a more thorough process later this fiscal year. And then to really, staff wanted to take those themes of housing and parking and standards and kind of zoom out to 2 advanced planning efforts that we're working on that are actually underway and being initiated right now. One, of course, as you heard, is the Housing Element Project, and really wanting to take a very kind of robust approach on community outreach, in a very different way. And so we do want to share some of those ideas with you and get some feedback there. And that'll be presented by Acting Principal Planner Leah Schmidt. And then the other, which is really also includes the parking standards, where we can have some of that conversation, but is about some of the state legislation that really requires the city to evaluate applications and projects based on objective standards. And so Senior Planner Blanton is going to do a short presentation on that. And we have some discussion questions for you there. Next slide. Again, I want to just emphasize, obviously this is a lot for an hour and a half or hour and 15-minute work session with all of the commissioners and council members. We anticipate that is kind of the initiation of these discussions. These are very robust, multi-year almost projects and planning efforts. And so we expect to bring these 2 bodies together again to have further conversations, be able to delve in on a number of these different issues. So just be aware this is just the beginning, and we'll have multiple opportunities to keep talking about these topics. Next slide. I think everyone knows, but just to kind of give you a sense of how much state legislation and the landscape is really changing. This is just a little bit of a timeline, how you can see how all the different laws are being passed at the state level related to housing. And I'm not going to go into all of this. There was a pretty detailed analysis in your staff in the staff report, but just wanting to acknowledge that a lot is changing, and we're learning. The community's learning, and so we're all in this together, figuring this out. Next slide. Some of the main themes, just want to touch on quickly, related to the housing legislation, are loosening regulations on accessory dwelling units. We're seeing this very much in real time at the permit counter, increasing options and flexibility for density bonus. We've seen this on a number of our affordable housing projects. Streamlining planning and approval processes, so like SB 35, if you've heard of that. Limiting local control to adopted objective standards. And that's really why we're having that second presentation by Senior Planner Blanton, is to talk about trying to come into compliance with some of these state laws related to objective standards, increasing housing production. And then, as you heard it from the speaker, updating housing element laws and what needs to be included in the housing element. The affordable housing ordinance, as I mentioned, I'm going to touch on just briefly, was originally adopted in 2003 and then recently revised in 2018. Council members, planning commissioners, and community members have all expressed a concern with the low percentage of affordable units required, compliance options. So we've heard from all of you that this is something you want to look at. And it is in the strategic roadmap where we are planning by the end of this fiscal year to start that evaluation of the affordable housing ordinance, holding work sessions on potential revisions, including with the Planning Commission. So we definitely want to keep the Planning Commission involved in those policy conversations. Next slide. One of the reasons that staff would, I think that we've heard from a lot of you let's change it, let's increase the percentage, let's just do on-site, and we can have all of those very detailed conversations, and maybe we can touch on some of those tonight, but staff wanted to kind of have in mind when we're talking about this, there are some really key considerations when you're talking about the affordable housing ordinance and changing those policies. One is first that the state actually regulates the inclusionary requirement with a cap on the maximum percentage, because the state acknowledges that if you have that too high, which gets to that second bullet point there, or the fee is too high, or the on-site unit requirement is too high, then overall housing could become infeasible. So the last thing we want to do in the interest of building more affordable housing is tweak the policy and then have housing not be feasible at all. So we have to be actually really careful. We need to be doing some economic analysis at the same time. Also, there's the ability of on-site inclusionary housing units to meet the community's needs. What we know is that the biggest need is at the vulnerable, lower income populations. Well, most of the market rate housing being built in the city right now is home ownership or townhome development. And so if we only did on-site inclusionary, then the units that would be getting built would be at that moderate income ownership level. Also, just an acknowledgement that we believe right now that the construction of market rate apartments may not be feasible in the city due to just the cost of building housing right now. So the type of construction is much more expensive. So even under today's status quo, we don't think market rents are high enough to support costs. We would need to look into this. So just be aware that if we're increasing costs by adding fees, we have to be really careful about what that does to market rate apartments, because we don't know that they're even feasible under today's fee scenario. Affordable housing fees can also be significantly leveraged to fund affordable housing most needed by Hayward renters that are at risk of displacement and produce higher rate of compliance with the city's RHNA allocation. This isn't to say that staff is very open to talking about ways we might change this, but we just wanted to make sure that there's a lot of issues at play here, considerations at play. We just want to make sure that we at least touched on them in big picture, that you have these in mind as you talk a little bit about the affordable housing ordinance. So Mayor, our hope was, and I don't know how, maybe we do this with the public comment, but was that we could then on the next slide just facilitate a conversation about the affordable housing ordinance. I know the Planning Commission really wants to share some of their thoughts about this. I do just want to caution everybody that we have a lot on the agenda, and we will be coming back to tackle this in a lot more depth, but we did want to allow a discussion about the affordable housing ordinance before we roll into the housing element.
Well, I will. Yes, I think we'll go ahead and see if any of there are only 6 attendees and one of them has already spoken. If any of the rest of you would like to speak, raise your hand now. I'm not seeing hands go up, so I'm going to close public comment on the item. And so let's go ahead with so do you have another presentation?
We do. We have 2 other presentations, one on the housing element, and we're going to keep them short like this just was, but we really wanted to make sure we left time for the Planning Commission to be able to share some of their thoughts, again, because that was one of the main purposes of this. So.
Okay, so we've closed public comments, but I do see 2 hands up to ask questions, I guess, about what you just presented. So we'll go to Planning Commissioner Okenda first.
Thanks. First question on the affordable housing ordinance is, are we going to have to conduct another nexus study, or will we be able to rely on the old sort of nexus study from 2017, 18, if I'm getting the years right?
Yeah. Does Christina Morales, our housing manager, do you want to jump in here?
I would have to look into that to see if it would still apply, but I would suspect if we're going to increase the percent of affordable units or the amount of the fee, we would definitely want to do an extensive analysis to ensure that development could support the increase in the affordability requirements or the fee.
Yeah.
So even if a full nexus study wasn't required, we would definitely be doing economic analysis to determine some of those feasibility issues. Yes.
Right. That's really helpful. And one thing that has come up in some of our commission meetings that I wanted to raise here with the opportunity was about large single family lots. Right now, single family lots are exempted under the affordable housing ordinance. Something that we've seen is, a lot of these big 5,000 square foot lots being developed, and they're paying nothing into the affordable housing fund. And so just a recommendation, from me, I think that we could be considering how to include some of those bigger properties, which are not going to be made affordable, and ensure that they have some kind of participation in funding affordable housing in the city. And those are really my 2 two kind of core question points. And then my last comment is just, of course, we'll have to see from the analysis, but I'm generally in favor of, encouraging the council to consider increasing the fee, the in lieu fee, and also the affordable housing requirements from the current percentages up. I think the current Nexus study has its up to 20%. I think we can look at somewhere, 12 to 15 is, not maxing it out. But I would obviously want to see the Nexus study, but I just am staking that ground for my own personal sort of point of view. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Councilmember Andrews.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to staff for having this presentation, this meeting. I know I requested this when I was on Planning Commission, and look, it happened. So I'm glad I was here for it in some capacity. So I wanted to ask about the 20% percentage that a lot of people would like to see. What have you heard from developers as their cutoff point, breaking point, and what are some of the incentives that we've seen? I know there's density bonuses and all that, but what is something that they say they must absolutely have in order to get to 20% affordable for projects?
Yeah, I will jump in, and then Christina's welcome to jump in as well. But we haven't had specific conversations where 20%, every project's different. Some of their costs are different depending on how much infrastructure they have to put in. I will tell you that something I've thought of is maybe for sale townhomes, maybe they can support a lot more where the costs, where you don't have structured parking or you don't have expensive construction types, maybe they can support a greater percentage. Whereas multifamily housing, I'm concerned that even under our current fee scenario, it may not even be feasible. And that's the type of housing we want around transit. So we may want to be looking at different product types and how what kind of fee we charge. But developers are very sensitive to affordable housing fees, any fees, because it does just increase costs, and costs right now are very expensive. And with some of the interruptions in supply chain, they're even more expensive. So I think we'd really just want to be careful about increasing that percentage and looking carefully at the product types.
Okay, thanks. That's all for right now. Okay,
Councilmember Lamnon.
Thank you. Yes, much appreciation for all the things that went into making tonight happen. So I want to push a little bit more on this question of sort of the percentage amount. And some of this builds on conversations we've had in the past. Certainly, I'm interested in projects really no more than 50% of any project being at market rate, given that the percentage of our RENA numbers is about 50% of the numbers we need is about market rate. And we historically go way above what's actually needed in the city. And so I was thinking about that as a way to sort of cap the amount of market rate housing that we get in the city. I absolutely respect the questions that you're raising about costs and feasibility. And I also want to, again, as we've talked about in the past, not assume that the lower income levels are rentals. What is it that will take? And I've had some conversation with the development community about what will it take. Some of that actually the new legislation seems to address. Some of it seems to be about financing. And I wonder, are there ways that we can help incentivize that, lower cost loans, things that will help bring down the affordability on the front end so that that savings can be passed on. And so I appreciate as these the studies get done and the conversations happen and the community engagement happens, as well as with the development community, that we continue to look at how do we create housing that's affordable by design for ownership opportunities in the city. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Zermania.
Got it. Just two comments. One of them is I am very leery about loosening up the regulations on ADUs because it's going to create more cars in our streets. So that's a problem. My neighbor converted his garage into an ADU, and now there are 3 more cars on my street. So that I am not happy. So ADUs, I think, are geared for an 80-year-old grandma or somebody who is a granny unit, supposed to be a granny unit. And these folks are not supposed to be driving, not 3 cars. Anyway, so that's why I'm leery. And my second one is I really would like to see an increase in the affordable housing percentage. So I think we can work on it. Let's study it some more. And with that, Jennifer, thank you very much. Good report.
Okay, thank you. Commission Chair Roach.
Thank you. And thank you to the mayor and the council for doing this with us tonight. And Jennifer, thank you for framing the conversation based on some of our conversations. I just want to say, yeah, the affordable housing thing has been a really big issue on the commission. We're always looking for more affordable units to be built. But I know there is some sweet spot between sort of building cost and lieu fees. And I know, like, around the country, there's lots of cautionary tales about both. If you raise the fees, you just, you discourage development and all that. But then there's plenty of instances where the fees have been changed and it has worked. So, and I feel like I don't want to spend too much time studying it. I would like to see the city try to raise them and see what happens, because what I'm reading around the country, these fees are adjusted often. So, as long as developers know ahead of time what those fees are, if we, if we raise it and we see some slight downtick in development, then we can adjust. I know that's not so easy because there's lots of calculations that go involved, but I do feel like what we're trying to encourage building and building of units, sort of on-site units. And I would like to see us make some bold steps in that direction. So those are my comments on the affordable housing, trying to keep this quick tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Bonilla.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Assistant City Manager Ott, for the presentation. And I also appreciate that tonight's going to be the first of many work sessions that we're going to be having with City Council to further explore some of these policy decisions. I think I've been pretty clear that I would also like to see our affordable housing policy much more aggressive than what it is now. I appreciate that we're not going to go really deep into what we're looking for in it in tonight's meeting, but I think the sentiment that we're hearing from everyone who spoke already is that we need to do something in this space and we need to do something quickly. So I appreciate what was said about, we need to do lots of studies and we need to bring in the community and other things like that. But perhaps we can look at more of an agile approach to see how we might be able to prioritize this, considering our arena numbers and how important it is for us to make sure that we're building and designing affordable housing. So I guess in my closing comment on this topic is I do also support increased fees and also increased requirements to build on site when we're approving these projects. So I would like to see this maybe come back as more of a focused work session so we could get a little bit deeper, perhaps just on this one topic, because I think there's a lot of considerations and a lot of input that a lot of us would like to provide on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Goldstein.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Nice presentation. I also in favor of the idea of having more of these sessions to give us an opportunity to collaborate. These are very tough, thorny issues that affect all of us. And it's great that we have an opportunity to come together and express our views. For sure, I do support the idea of higher in lieu fees. But I also think in order to meet our affordability targets that we are going to have to find more cooperation in finance and in state and federal grants. My family historically has been involved in development. I know a little bit about it. I'm no expert, but I can see already, based on the developers that we have that come to the table looking to build here in Hayward, that affordability is going to require more than what we're currently putting into it. And financing is at an all-time low. But in order to make affordable units, there has to be affordability also for the people buying, the people building. And I think the only way we're going to make those targets is the combination of financing and state and federal grants. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Ali Sullivan.
Hi, good evening, everyone. First off, sincere apologies for my extreme tardiness there. I do apologize. I did have a chance to review the presentation that was provided to all the commissioners beforehand. So thank you for providing that. And very briefly, at the risk of repeating what my other commissioners have said here, would just like to echo that I, certainly am in support of a more aggressive approach towards public housing for us. I think, as I think about it, perhaps there might be some concerns or fears around, asking too much of developers or pushing the limit a little bit too far for Hayward. And my thoughts on that really are that, I believe the market will indeed bear that. The market will indeed bear higher requirements. We've seen some of our neighboring cities, even I think in the last week or so, extend what their both in-lieu fees and set-aside requirements are. It's the right thing to do, I feel, and I think that it's a solution for the city of Hayward. And so I would like to see us continue to push the limit. I think there's more room on what those requirements look like. And at the end of the day, we have a severe housing shortage. There are a lot of folks that are looking for houses at market prices. And so even if there were higher costs for developers that led to higher purchase prices for the general population, at the benefit of folks able to secure additional affordable housing, I'm confident that the market will bear that here in Hayward. And I do think that we should see ourselves at par with other cities adjacent to us and not have a sense that, we need to have a lower requirement or less cost for developers because we're Hayward. No, I think the opposite. We should be pushing the limit. We should create that environment where we say to developers, we have high expectations. If you want to build here, you're going to need to meet it. And I indeed think that they will meet that.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Wahab.
Thank you, Mayor. Number one, I'm happy that we're having this meeting. I know that, we've been asking for some type of joint planning commission since they see all the projects before pretty much any of us. So this is a pleasure. I do want to ask our assistant city manager, if a developer comes into the city of Hayward and they decide to, let's say, do half of our in lieu fee, half of affordable housing, is that a possibility for them?
I don't think that is. Well, I guess there's an alternative. Christina, do you want to jump in? Maybe if they use the alternative?
Yeah, so there's an option to comply with the ordinance by proposing an alternative plan. So that is required to have either the approval by the decision-making body, possibly city council, but it has to be reviewed and approved, but they could. So you would evaluate if it's sufficient to meet the requirement.
Okay. And then there are a couple of cities here in the Bay Area, I'm going to say larger extended Bay Area, where they have their affordable housing at an extremely high percentage. And the entire point of it being that no affordable housing is built, right? So to Assistant City Manager, Ott, your point of kind of finding that sweet spot, I will say that based on the project that we saw with Meritage Homes, their additional affordable housing that they did in that agreement at the very end, in my conversation with them, they said that it wasn't even a problem, right? So I know that what we have right now is too low. And I know I've been asking to kind of push it towards 20%. 30% were for some significant projects that I've seen out in San Francisco. So I think that based on everything I've heard here, I know that we can push those numbers. But if we can have kind of like a range of pros and cons. And then the in lieu fees, I think we've had a lot of significant discussion about in lieu fees. I think we talked about it for a while. So I'm open to seeing what staff suggests, but I do want to make it very clear that we should be supporting all types of housing, including ADUs. And if parking is an issue, which we know I've talked about in the hills of Hayward and some of the different areas of Hayward, that it may be suggested that they cut their front yard a little bit to create an extra parking spot that they don't need to park on the street and disturb neighbors if need be. By something aesthetically, visually pleasing and so forth. But the front yard is a front yard, right? That's just, I don't know what people do on their front yard, but a possibility right there. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll just add, for one thing I wanted to kind of point out to everyone, if you aren't aware of it already, this Thursday evening, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Association of Bay Area Governments are going to be having a joint meeting to approve the final version of Plan Bay Area 2050. If you haven't taken a look at Plan Bay Area 2050, do so. I know you can find it online, either at the MTC or the ABAG site. I happen to serve on the ABAG executive board, so I'll be taking part in that discussion. And so that has a lot in it about all of this and ideas that are going to be pushed at the regional level on us. So, before we meet again to discuss, as we proceed with this, I would really recommend that everybody take a look at that. Maybe even watch the meeting on Thursday night if you have the time. But afterwards, I don't know whether anything will be changed in the draft that's out there now, but I doubt that too much will. And then the other, and as part of that, and there already exists something called, you may have heard of it, BAFA, Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. And that was something that was thought was sort of drummed up in around 2019, and was going to be a regional ballot measure to support housing, especially affordable housing, I guess. But of course, when COVID came along, that just, it was felt that would not fly for a 2020 election. So, but it does exist. It was created, and it recently got an infusion of, I can't remember how much, but several $1 million from
$20 million.
$20 million. Okay. $20 million from the state government. So it does exist. And they do have plans to do some pilot programs around housing. And then the other thing I was going to say, in response to the discussion that some of you have had on ADUs, and then I think it was Commissioner Okenda that talked about, what we're doing with big lots, seeing that some of these big large homes, we're seeing requests to build large homes on single family lots, is to consider requiring part of a house over a certain square footage to have an ADU built into it. One of the Caltrans parcels, the Bunker Hill parcel group, we actually came to requiring ADUs be included in those houses as part of the development agreement, but that's something to think about. So that's all from me right now. And I do see Councilmember Marquez.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be brief. Thank you to our fellow planning commissioners for being here and for staff. I'm excited about the ongoing discussion. What I would like to see when we do have a deeper discussion on looking at the affordable housing ordinance is I want to know all the different pots of funding. So we have the A1 bond measure, or I forgot if it's a sales tax, I apologize, but the A1 funding, state, federal, I basically just want to know all the available pots of money. I want to make sure that the city remains competitive in leveraging those dollars. So that's going to be an important data point. And also want us to keep in mind, I'm just going to mention a couple of things since I haven't heard it mentioned, is the concept of universal design, the idea of aging in place. We have many multi-generational families living in our community. So to not lose sight of that as well. But appreciate everyone's input thus far and looking forward to the ongoing discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no further hands up right now, we'll move on with the next staff presentation.
Yes, and we're going to combine them just in the interest of time. So Acting Principal Planner Leah Schmidt's going to share her screen, do the housing element. We'll do the residential objective standards, and then we'll combine that discussion for both items since we appreciate everyone keeping their comments short. We can get through this, and then we'll, of course, come back for further feedback.
So much. So the purpose of this component of the presentation is a Housing Element 101. And I just want to provide you with some really general background and purpose information for the housing element. Next slide, please. So a housing element is one of 8 mandatory elements, and it must be updated every 8 years. It's the only element that is reviewed and certified by the State Department of Housing and Community Development. This year, it's also important to note that we jurisdictions have to provide an update annually to the State Department of Housing and Community Development through the annual progress report, and that's where jurisdictions report where they're making progress on their regional housing needs allocation. If cities don't submit that report on time, then we lose potential funding sources, access to grants and infrastructure funding. So that speaks to what Councilmember Marquez was just talking about. So our housing element is tied into those funding sources. The city's housing element is being updated, is being combined with an update to the climate action plan, as well as updates related to environmental justice and the safety element. Next slide, please. So why do we need a housing element? It's an opportunity for community conversations around housing, challenges and solutions, environmental justice, safety, hazard planning, and climate change. State law does not require that local jurisdictions build or finance housing, but we have to plan for it throughout the jurisdiction. And then, as I just stated, when talking about the annual progress report, non-compliance creates issues related to sort of loss of funding sources, and it positions the city to be vulnerable to potential lawsuits. Next slide, please. So the housing element does have mandatory components, and they're sort of listed in this little flower. We have demographic analysis, needs assessment, constraints, public outreach and community engagement, and housing sites inventory, which leads into policies and programs, a lot of which are being mentioned tonight. The things that you're talking about through the Affordable Housing Ordinance, through universal design, these are all programs and policies that could roll into the housing element. Next slide, please. So I already mentioned it, and it's been brought up earlier in the conversation. What is the regional housing needs assessment? Nice to have a little brush up every 8 years ahead of the housing element update. The state projects the housing need throughout the entire state, and then distributes that number of housing to each council of government. There are 23 COGs in California. ABAG is the Association of Bay Area Governments, covers the 9-county Bay Area region. We were allocated 441,176 units during this cycle, which is a 234% increase over the last housing element cycle. And then ABAG's Housing Methodology Committee did meet together over a year to come up with how those units would be allocated to each local jurisdiction within the ABAG region. And those numbers are anticipated to be finalized this fall. Next slide, please. So this slide, it illustrates how the Housing Methodology Committee came up with how they allocated the units to each jurisdiction. They had a strong emphasis on equity this time, and what they called that is access to high opportunity areas, in addition to looking at access and proximity to high jobs areas and transit-rich areas. High opportunity areas are defined as areas that have good schools, that have access to parks, that have access to grocery stores, and that they were allocating units affordable for lower and very low income households in higher proportions to those jurisdictions, so that those households could accrue the benefits of just living in those areas. And then the transit-rich and jobs-rich allocations align with greenhouse gas reduction standards for the state, the goals for the state. Next slide, please. So this is Hayward's RENA allocation for the last housing element cycles on top, and then the updated draft allocation below. It's about a 700 unit increase. The highest increase is in the very low income category. So that's on the far left, people making 50% or less of area median income. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give you a snapshot of how we're doing with our current RENA. You see this in your staff reports. We talk about it a lot, but what I wanted to highlight here is that in that annual progress report I was talking about earlier in this presentation that we submit to the state, and then they update, how jurisdictions are doing, they will only count developments that have pulled building permits. So those are projects that have been deemed feasible, where the developer is moving forward on it, and they are actually pulling permits. So you can see in this table, the dark box indicates where we are with our goal based on that count. It's not great, but it's not that far off from other jurisdictions in California. Whereas if you look at our approved column, we're at 24% and much higher. And then if you move over into estimated compliance and you're looking at approved and pending approval, we're getting much higher. So many jurisdictions have pushed back on HCD about this and the state and said, we have control over approving projects, but we don't have control over developers pulling building permits and building projects, which, as was mentioned earlier, there are increases in labor supplies, there's increases in materials that could make projects infeasible, but jurisdictions are not allowed to count those projects we approve. It's only when permits are pulled. Next slide. So this is an outline of our housing element timeline. The project basically kicked off with a contract award in July. Right now, we're finalizing our public outreach plan. We'll be kicking that off and really focusing heavily on outreach over the next 6 months. In 2022, we'll be drafting plans based on community outreach, bringing it back to the community, to the commission, to the council for review. We're hoping to submit a draft HCD in fall of 2022 before we submit our final version in January of 2023. Next slide. So I just wanted to touch and kind of dive a little bit deeper into our outreach next steps. Basically, we're launching our website this week. We're going to be launching a survey of the community to understand who our community is, who's responding, what are their needs. We're also going to be developing mini presentations. They're going to be like sort of little toolkits to really lay the groundwork for education. We're going to be talking about what's the history of housing in Hayward, what is redlining, what is environmental justice, and other topics. And those little mini presentations will be in English and Spanish so people can use them and staff can go out and even give presentations. The website's going to have an idea generator tool on there where it's like if people say, hey, I have a high school English class and we're talking about this topic, can you come out and do one of these presentations? That's an opportunity for people to request that we come out there. The next big one that we're planning is in November, we're going to have a gallery walk. And that's going to be printed materials in English and Spanish. We're going to post it up. It's going to be about housing. It's going to be about affirmatively furthering fair housing, environmental justice, safety, how all of these, this is about educating at this point in the process. And then we're going to have an interactive either gallery wall or a box where people can feel that they can post their comments or ideas, recommendations. We're also going to record us walking through the gallery walk, post it to the website so people who can't make it out to one of the locations where we're going to be hosting this gallery walk, they can still participate. And then we're going to be throughout the project looking at mini grants to advocacy and other groups for both climate action planning and housing to get the word out. Next slide. In the winter, we're going to be partnering with the Chabot English class, and we're going to be going out with prompts, and we're going to be interviewing Hayward residents about housing, health, their lived experiences around these topics. We're going to be focusing on listening. Then we're going to bring those materials back, and we're going to use interviews, stories, photos, and videos. We're going to link them together and post them to the website and to social media and invite other people to share their lived experiences around these topics. And that's really about getting people to be engaged and not just think about the housing element as this dry document no one cares about or thinks about besides me, basically, and get people to think about storytelling and what housing means on an emotional level. It's also really important to note that the outreach component of the housing element is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Project for the Development Services Department. Next slide. So I've met with a couple of advocacy groups. I've met with individuals. I've presented at the Homelessness Housing Task Force. And so we've kind of come up with groups, faith-based organizations, students, seniors, nonprofit and market rate developers, homeowners, renters, like different groups of people to reach out to. So tonight, one of the questions I'll be asking you when we open it up for another discussion is who else to reach out to. Next slide. Other questions that you may or may not want to answer, and you can always email me separately. The website will be up soon. are there housing element related issues that the Planning Commission specifically wants to communicate to the council? What community advocacy or interest groups or events or locations do you recommend we visit? And again, I mentioned we're going to be having a survey. Are there any topics or questions that you would like to see included in that initial survey? So that concludes my presentation. And
just to time check, Leah, I mean, I know we have another presentation on residential standards, but we have now at 6:25. I'm wondering, Mayor, if we should come back for the residential standards presentation just to make sure we don't run out of time for everyone to talk. Or
I think we're running very short right now.
Okay, that would be your suggestion, Mayor, is that we just kind of put commission and council comments on the housing element, and then we schedule a follow-up joint work session to talk about the objective standards, because it's going to be too much to get us done by 6:45.
I do think, we don't have the time tonight for everybody to weigh in on that. And it's a very separate topic and maybe one that deserves its own meeting. Is everyone, Chair Roche, you think that sounds good to you? And
I see some thumbs up about that for my commissioners. And I think, everybody would like to be able to get their comments in on this topic without feeling rushed to the next one. So that sounds
right. Right. And that's a really different kind of different and different focus. So we will see you again for another. But meanwhile, are we ready to go to comments and questions on this one? Okay. So we'll start with Council Member Zermano.
Thank you very much. On RENA numbers, in the past, we've always seen that our city has been given a larger percentage of low-income affordable housing than other cities. A higher percentage of lower income. We need to build more as per the other, compared to other cities. Because I've been at ABAG meeting. I was at an ABAG meeting, and one of the representatives says, "Well, we don't want those people there." So I'm thinking last time it was Livermore had a very low requirement for low income housing, affordable housing compared to us. So I want us to look at that. Okay, that's one. Number two is. As per HUSD, we're now something like 16,000 students in our district. So that's a low number compared to the 22,000 that we used to have. So how do our housing needs relate to this low number of students? And is that something that we need to worry about, or do we need to work with? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just want to comment on that. I don't think that we were allocated a higher number of low income housing. And in fact, I think it was probably more the other way around in this cycle, because the emphasis was on getting more low income housing into jobs rich, services rich areas. That I'm not sure we were quite in that category. Is that, am I assessing that right?
I was just thinking last time we saw this was Livermore had a lower percentage of lower income housing.
In the prior round, in the prior arena numbers?
Yeah.
I don't think that's the case in this
Okay,
section.
all right. I may be wrong.
Leah, do you know, I haven't looked at low income. I know our percentage did not go up in total units compared to as much as other jurisdictions. So we had less of an increase in other jurisdictions, in part, I think, because of that.
Okay.
But we can look at that and we can analyze it more when we come back.
All right.
So it's a percentage that's allocated to every jurisdiction. You get a number, and every jurisdiction's allocated the same percentage of very low, moderate. They don't. It with different weights, but I don't think we were based on my review.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Councilmember Andrews.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to see if there was anyone that could answer Councilmember Zermano's question regarding the schools and comparing that with the reading numbers, if there will be some review of that.
We can look at students and schools as part of the housing element, but there's no specific state requirement for us to do that. That might have been looked at through the allocation of the units. to the different.
And Councilmember Andrews, that was part of what the district did over the past year with their committee. We did have former Development Services Director Laura Simpson, and then also Sarah Bowser did sit on that committee with the district to help provide projections and to share our reallocations and kind of projections of housing units. And the district did use those in their calculations for the most recent study that they completed.
Okay. All right. And then I had a question about outreach. I saw there was bilingual outreach happening, but wanted to know what was being done for the Asian communities, and how would you reach out to them?
At this point, we have as the potential, like for translating into Chinese traditional in different sort of languages we have in our outreach plan. I'm gonna be speaking to the clerk's office to figure out like does everything need to be translated to that, or can we be strategically reviewing and creating those materials on an as needed basis? Okay. I would suggest connecting maybe with Hayward Promise Neighborhood, people who are working on redistricting at some of the locations that they're going to, including grocery stores, Target, where people are at most of the time. I would start looking at those kinds of locations. I just know that parks are not necessarily where a lot of people will meet you at all the time, but they have to go to those locations to do their shopping. So it might be more convenient for them to go where they're running an errand. So those are some of the ideas that I was thinking about. And then I'm happy to see that Chabot was involved in this. How are we involving, or are you involving Cal State East Bay as well to help out with some of this information to get out to students in particular? We'd be conducting outreach to them, but we don't have the same connection to professors to get into a class the way we do with Chabot. The city just has relationships already built. But I would absolutely reach out and let them know I'd love to partner with professors there. We will reach out to them and maybe do a gallery walk up there if people will find a spot for us. But right now it's not planned to be as part of a curriculum.
Okay. I would definitely try at least to make them feel included, just because we do hear a lot of comments quoting that Cal State East Bay students are needing housing. So it'd be nice to be able to actually reach out to them directly. That's all for now. Thanks.
Oh, that's a good idea. Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry, Councilmember Andrews, you mentioned Hayward Promise Neighborhood. So that's kind of a connection we have because the Cal State actually, oversees that program. So, and then let's see, we have Commissioner Okenda is next.
Thank you. I am going to be referring to answering some of the three questions that are in the staff report related to this item, just to kind of keep things in buckets. So the first one, in terms of outreach, what community advocacy interest groups I would suggest to reach out with for a broader equitable outreach. The community I want to focus on are people who are formerly incarcerated or people with arrest and conviction histories. That has not come up. I've noticed a lack of representation or discussion of that population in our housing element and our housing equity work generally. And just to share a little bit of data on some of the research that I've done, I'm a reentry attorney, and this is kind of an issue of fair chance housing that I focus quite a bit on. So I want to share just a couple quick points related to Alameda County and Hayward, and specifically. That with the homeless populations that we've been surveying, what we're noticing is about 10 times that folks who are formerly incarcerated or have a record are 10 times to 27 times more likely to be homeless or unstably housed. Huge numbers of differences. In Alameda County, according to Everyone Home, 1 in 12 people experiencing homelessness were people who didn't have long-term housing options after they were released from jails or prisons. And in Hayward specifically, in the Everyone Home surveying, 10% of the people surveyed were on probation or parole currently during the time of surveying. And finally, just as a broader number, somewhere between 25 to 50% of people who experience chronic homelessness have records. So this is a unique population with a unique subset of issues that they bring to the table. And I think that we need to carve out space in our housing element when we're talking about equity for serving this population in particular. To answer question 2, where some of the specific locations or folks that we can actually reach out to get more information and develop partnerships in this area, starting with formerly incarcerated people and system impacted people, their families, who are the people who, when you're returning from prison, you have to rely mostly on your family. And some organizations and advocacy, sort of other organizations and faith-based organizations that are doing work in this area. I work for one of them. Root and Rebound is definitely one of them. A leader in this area is Just Cities. All of Us Are None, Legal Services for Prisoners with Children. La Familia is, we're familiar with the work that they're doing in our community. And Central Legal is doing a lot of tenants' rights work, obviously, and there's an overlap, of course, between with that. And then for faith organizations, the Interfaith Council and Glad Tidings are 2 entities that are doing some of this work and have interest in this area, and so pulling them in as well. And then the third question you ask, the staff is asking about survey questions specifically. I would kind of shift a little bit on this, and I would definitely want to include density of development as a question, like basically gauging the baseline for NIMBYism or YIMBYism in Hayward. I think that's a really important data point that we'd want to gather. And then getting people's thoughts on the inclusion of low income affordable housing in their neighborhoods. So kind of this YIMBY NIMBY idea. And those are my quick points that I wanted to make. Thanks for the time.
All right, thank you. Commission Chair Roche.
Thank you. I think I just wanted to touch on 3 points about outreach as well. That when it's always sort of struck me on the Planning Commission when we have affordable housing projects coming up that we don't hear from members of the community that might benefit from those housing projects. So I think I'd like to see outreach go further abroad to people that might actually benefit from it, because usually we just hear from the usual neighbors that are not interested in the affordable housing coming to their neighborhood. And I want to see what we can do about that to reach out to a broader potential use of the affordable housing community would be really helpful. The second thing is, a while ago, Commissioner Bonilla, Commissioner Kendo, and I were part of a Tennyson High School presentation talking to kids that were, talking about concerns in their area and planning and development and things like that. And one of the things that struck me was, how aware they were of when a road was being reconstructed or a stop sign turned into a street light, that they understood that meant gentrification, and they understood maybe that meant they were going to have to move now because they may have already done this once or twice. And so I would like to see really strong communication with the schools. And, it's obviously really relevant given that we've heard that a lot of people have moved out, that if there was a liaison that was specifically with the schools, where schools were aware of what families were potentially on the edge of needing to move, because it's so disruptive to a kid to have to keep moving to new areas. And to sort of direct our outreach for affordable housing to those groups and have that really tight connection. It might be a sort of like to the source connection for us and maybe help what's happening. It's obviously future looking because it sounds like we've already lost a lot of families to move to more affordable areas. But I think that might be a real directed way, rather than trying to passively attract the attention of people at parks or stores or something like that. Go to the source where maybe there can be a monthly talk with families and see how families are doing. And then the third area is senior housing. I mean, just today I do senior legal aid. And just today I was talking to one of the clients about how tentatively housed a lot of seniors are, and potentially reach out to them, reach out to senior legal aid, to the local senior center. They might have their, thumb of the pulse of what's happening in that area and how we can reach out to seniors and find them where they are and what their needs might be. And the last thing I was going to say to Councilmember Zemina's point about parking and ADUs and all of that. Well, I went to a planning commission convention a couple of years ago, and we all talked about these increased housing rates everybody was faced with and what we were going to do about the parking and the traffic, and no one had an answer. So I feel like I know it's something for our next thing to talk about, parking and traffic and all of that. But yeah, continues to be, we need more housing. There's going to be more parking. And so, for a future date, but it is a concern. Those are my comments. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I'll just say 2 words, fewer cars. But moving on to Councilmember Marquez.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be very brief. So I concur with all the comments made by the previous speakers in terms of the marginalized groups that we need to target, as well as the outreach efforts. I just want to emphasize the importance of really meeting people where they're at. I know Councilmember Andrews mentioned grocery stores. I want to add laundromats, and I want to see us really use technology. So if we could have community ambassadors, staff members out there with an iPad, giving people an opportunity to actually fill out the survey on the spot. Just really want to make this as accessible as possible. And also it's going to be key to translate key material. I know sometimes we mention, oh, you could Google and translate. People are not going to do that. We really need to make sure we're getting the content to the people that need it the most. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Lamnon.
Thank you. So one of the questions I think was raised earlier by Commissioner Okenda, but I wanted to underscore was, we know that density is going to be required. And so I'd love to hear from the community, what can you live with? What would make that higher density in your neighborhood more livable? What are those factors? May help us with the objective design standards, et cetera. I'm wondering as we go through this process, if there are some parcels that we want to target related to the SB 10 new law. I appreciate the outreach, as has been said by a number of people. And I think I didn't see necessarily Native peoples or folks affected by redlining as a targeted outreach. That may already be in there, but I'll just name it. And in that conversation, I'd also be interested in kind of what does better look like? Not just, obviously we've eliminated racial covenants, but where do we go from here? Because we know that the redlining continues to have impacts on our community. The loss of land continues to have impacts on communities. So what does reparation look like? What does evolution of policy? What does proactively furthering really look like to the communities that are affected by it? And then lastly, one of the approaches that I know the county uses is ethnic media. And so that may be a way to reach other language populations. The other thing I've heard from populations that works well is just having some lines in anything we create in language that says, if you'd like more information in this, and then making sure that that obviously connects to perhaps a staff member with that language capacity. That helps to mitigate everything has to be translated, but really does allow people to get something translated if they need it or they want access to it. Thank you very much for all the work.
All right, thank you. And Commissioner Bonilla, everybody's doing a great job of being concise, I will say so.
Thank you. And that's a nice reminder for me to be concise. So thanks, Mayor. I appreciate the community-driven approach that we're taking here, but I want us to continue to really put the community at the center of how we're looking at revising these housing elements. And in particular, I feel like we've put a lot of structure in place and created a lot of partnerships to reach into the hardest hit parts of our community through the COVID efforts that we've been having, making things convenient, meeting people where they are, creating, great partnerships that are innovative, using community influencers to bring other marginalized groups and voices to the table. I really want us to look at a comprehensive approach around community engagement for this as well. In particular for our BIPOC communities, because we know that those tend to be the communities that are most impacted by housing and other developments. The other thing is, I think for a future meeting, I would love to hear more comprehensively about how we are addressing these arena numbers, because I appreciate that we're making progress, but they're still way too low for me, for my liking. And when I think about this multi-tiered housing approach that we're taking, there's the policy around affordable, right? We have this funding that's coming from the feds, from the state, from the county. We have our own city funding we're putting into this. So I would just like to see how all of this comes together to really push forward a plan to increase our arena numbers in a much more aggressive way than what we've done in the past. Those are my only comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Goldstein.
Yes, thank you. Great ideas coming, you guys. It's really wonderful to hear all these brilliant ideas coming forward. Housing affordability has only in part to do with the number of units available, the cost to build them, and the purchase price or rental price to the consumer, but also to the availability of financing to those consumers. And one of the problems that we have in this country is if a family is unable to make their payments for 90 days, they get their house taken away. And same thing for landlords. They have a certain amount of time if they're not receiving the rents that they're allowed by court, allowed by law to evict those people. And I believe under both of those circumstances, we're really doing a disservice to those people who are already housing insecure. And so we really need to find some ways to address how banking structure can best keep people housed, even when they're experiencing great difficulties. Death in the family, for example, should not be a reason for an entire family to be evicted from a home, perhaps that they've been paying 5, 10, 15 years into it. And then, similarly for renters. So we need to find a way to make housing affordability a matter that is influenced, or I should say, addressed in that financing part. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Stevens.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think it's really interesting that Hayward's REMA numbers are very similar to developments throughout the other parts of the Bay Area. And having supported developments all throughout Northern California, one of my experiences is that the single reason why development doesn't occur is because there's significant barriers. And it used to be that public opposition was one of those barriers that really stopped developments from moving forward. But of course, the state is, through its legislation, taking away a lot of local control, which might be easing that challenge. Of course, we've heard a little bit about costs, horizontal, the vertical, and I think the final one is really the city fees. And while we talk a lot about having requirements for inclusionary housing or affordable housing, we talk about fees. I've often wondered if there was a way to incentivize a developer to actually do this rather than penalize them by helping subsidize this. I wonder if this would actually strengthen the community, because as we've heard many times in presentations to the Planning Commission, a developer needs to have full knowledge and complete vision into the process in order for them to move forward. Thank you. Oh, and I'm very, very interested in the objective standards. That's my main interest.
I just didn't, quick response to that would mention density bonuses as probably that approach of the carrot instead of the stick. But moving on to Commissioner Lowe. Welcome. I understand this is Commissioner Lowe's second meeting. So
yes. So I'll probably be way briefer than everyone else because I just don't have the knowledge yet. But I did want to comment that one of the groups I think that we could reach out to are domestic violence shelters and advocates. And also, I was thinking that we could take those surveys, that same idea of taking the technology and going to our downtown farmers market or festivals or things like that we have. Like, for example, the lighting of the tree this year would be a good place to have people down there with the technology and having them filling out the surveys right there on the spot. Also, in addition to working with Chabot College students, a lot of the high school students need community service hours for to graduate or for college, or they just want to get community service hours, and that might be a good way to tap into high school social studies classes to see if they would be interested in helping with that, because they could also start at their own high school PTA meetings and talk to the parents there. And that would be a good way to get a cross-section of our community if we do that throughout the high schools. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Councilmember Wahab?
Thank you.
And I just have to really ask for quick, we're going to have to end pretty soon. So if you can really.
Okay. And City Manager Ott, or Assistant City Manager Ott, could you put the slides up again on those 4 questions?
Leah, can you put it up again?
And while that's happening,
the first was about what other ways we should outreach.
Okay. Yeah, I think all the comments that we heard tonight were actually really good. I also agree with Commissioner Goldstein specifically on the effort to preserve people that are currently in housing, making sure that they are not moved out. And I think that was one of the biggest concerns of the city for a number of years. I think that we're going to kind of go into that again. I specifically do want to highlight that we should be reaching out to a lot of groups, understanding that their interests and specifically, I think that on multiple different language media is important, but then also just a broad blanket outreach, specifically to the city, in the flatlands and the hills. Everybody should get a postcard or some type of social media. I think social media is probably the best way to go. And then specific locations, again, I'm going to highlight the equitable outreach and making sure that we're covering east, west, north, and south. And then if we can have several targets, just the way on this day, we're going to be out here at this community and making sure that people know that timeline well ahead of time. So people can either submit their comments online or come in person. And then, for the most part, I again agree with the majority of what people said. So I appreciate it and thank you. And to Commissioner Okinda, also including our most vulnerable as well, and those kind of down on their luck at that point. I appreciate those comments. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And oh shoot, can you take your screen down? I'm sorry, I'm not seeing any other hands up right now. I'll just add, because I don't think they were mentioned, but trying to reach out and work through existing homeowners associations. We have lots of them in the city, and also our mobile home parks, which are a good source of housing, a lot for seniors and what their comments might be. And I really thank everybody for their comments. And I'm so sorry that we had to be rushed like this. And we're going to have to talk next time we have one of these meetings about how we really have the time we need to have the discussion that we all want to have. So we will do that. And with that, I'm going to adjourn, and the city council will be. Thank you to the planning commissioner for joining us tonight. We really appreciated meeting with you. I truly wish we had more time, but we have to go to another meeting. So until
thank you for having us, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chair Rich. Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Recording stopped.